Pronounced Sankofa, is a word in the Twi language of Ghana meaning to retrieve. Literally, go back and get. San, to return. Ko, to go. Fa, to fetch, seek and take. Sankofa is often associated with the proverb Lisewawa, Faino Wazankofa Eyenchi, which translates as, it is not wrong to go back for that which you have forgotten.
Their spokesman sings his thanks to Britain.
Now, may I ask you your name?
Lord Kitchener.
Lord Kitchener. Now, I'm told that you are really the king of calypso singers, is that right?
Yes, that's
well, now, will you
true.
sing for us?
Right now.
Yes.
London is the place for me. London, this lovely city.
My understanding of the Windrush generation is that the term was coined by Sam King in the 1980s in London. He was a former mayor of Southwark, I believe. And it was related particularly to the people who came over starting in 1948 on the Empire Windrush, and who continued to come over to Britain until approximately 1971, 72. And so I believe it goes up to 1973. I'm not certain. Some say 71. So, and those people were classed as the Windrush Generation. So that's my understanding, that the Windrush Generation are the people who came originally from the Caribbean, particularly from the Caribbean, from 1948, and then brought their families over here. So those people are classed as the Windrush Generation. I'm a child of the Windrush Generation, and my father was part of that Windrush Generation. So my understanding is that it is about the people from the Caribbean, because those were the people who came over here at that time.
Well, technically, the Windrush was the name of a ship, and the first large-scale number of post-war migrants came on that ship, but it means so much more than just the name of a ship. It marks my parents' generation coming to this country, being invited to this country to help rebuild it after the Second World War. And it marks the lives that they've had in this country since 1945. And the fact that a lot of our parents were willing to put up with the kind of discrimination that their children just will not tolerate. You know, I've said my parents were willing to be second-class citizens in order to help their children, but we will not do that. And I think it's the actual Windrush scandal, the fact that people who were citizens were treated so horribly that many of them died, they were deported, they lost bank accounts, etc. And the worst thing about the scandal is that the government knew in advance that this group of people would be targeted, and they either didn't care or they thought, so what? I do think the current Tory government, they quite like a bit of racism because it appeals to the far right. And the last thing they want is to lose votes to the far right. So they'll move as far right as possible. They do not want any room to the right of them for people like UKIP to sneak in. And sadly, I think the Labour Party are not attacking them enough. They kind of see us as a community who've got nowhere else to go. You're going to have to vote Labour. But they're not supporting us in the way that we should be. I think we should have, we should be celebrating migrants and migration and what people have done to for this country, not threatening to ship people off to Rwanda, which is just right-wing cannon fodder.
When people were invited to come to Britain after the Second World War to help to rebuild the country, many of them actually came over and left their families behind. And they came over to work. Many thought they'd be here for about 5 years and go back to the Caribbean because they thought Britain's streets were paved with gold. And they'd make lots of money within 5 years, go back to and look after their family. However, that didn't happen. Most of them stayed, and very few of them actually were able to go back because they found that life in Britain wasn't that easy. And it was quite expensive to live in Britain, and making that money that they wanted, it was difficult. So they started sending money back to the Caribbean, and later on some actually brought their spouses and their children into Britain. So what actually happened is there were fathers and mothers that came over and left their children with other relatives, and those children were looked after by the fathers and mothers in this country. And what they used to do, they used to send money back to the families to look after their children. And eventually, and one of the things they used to do, they used to send a barrel with clothes and all sorts of things every so often back to the children and the people who were looking after them, and they later became known as the Barrel Children. And so the Barrel Children, I was probably one of those because my dad used to send stuff back to Jamaica when I was over there. Eventually those children, many of those children were actually brought to Britain and were educated in Britain. But some of them, quite a few of them, also stayed behind, and they continued to be Barrel Children until they grew up.
If we cast our mind back to the 50s and you look at the difference between the Caribbean Windrush generation and Africans who came here, there's a very strong correlation between the Asians and the Africans who came here. You've got people who came here with their own language, and although the Africans largely operated in Christianity, they had set up their own churches and systems that they stuck to. And you can see that with a very robust Nigerian community today that is quite insular and thereby keeps its cultural values and protects its people economically. The church is a base. Then when Caribbeans came, we largely thought of ourselves as Little Englanders. My granddad used to say he thought the pavements were covered in gold, and he couldn't convey enough his shock and his surprise when he saw an English beggar, because he had no mental concept. Remember, the media is a very powerful commodity. He had no photograph of a homeless Englishman or an English beggar. The concept was everybody was wealthy. So because Africans weren't congruent in their thinking when we arrived in the UK, there was no real socio-economic plan between us. But outside of that, a very strong trait that Caribbeans formed was the partner, our cultural banking. And that cultural banking was how we actually established wealth, independent wealth, in the UK, where we would purchase freeholds and own them wholly with no mortgage from the partners. Now, that was based out of necessity being the mother of all invention. Because of the racism, banks wouldn't extend those mortgages. However, the minute that they realized that we were worth the money, that we could independently economically organize, they started to offer those mortgages. And what happened as a byproduct? We're in debt. They're getting massive interest. No generational wealth, or the debt is passed down to the next generation. Whereas when we actually observed cultural banking partners, we owned freeholds. Now, mine is always what is next, because we understand how the Windrush generation arrived, what they went through, and how they were rewarded for building the UK after the Second World War by being asset stripped, kidnapped, and deported. What is next?
My parents, they came here in the, I would say, the late 50s, early 60s. They came here, and I would say they left me and other siblings in Jamaica. After, I think it was after 10, 15 years they've been here, we followed. And so what happened when I came here, I went to school in Mosside, Burley High School. And from there, I decided when I left school, I had a job, a secular job type of thing. And I decided, listen, this wasn't what I want. I wanted to go into business. I've always had an interest in business. And I thought, how am I going to go into it? And I did devise a plan without any knowledge in business. And I took the chance, and it worked. I started out on the market, funny enough. And from there I decided my father was in the baking business. And he was working for some of the local bakeries. And I remember asking him one day, saying, I'm interested in that because I want to go into that. I want to later on develop that. And he said to me, if you want to learn, you have to come to one of the bakeries that he was working at, or he was helping out. So I did. And from there I picked up the idea of baking, and I've done that. And I decided to open a shop on Claymont Road. After the market, I was doing market a few days of the week. And then from there I decided to literally own the shop, bought the shop in Mosside. And from there, set up a bakery. It was hard, it wasn't easy. I think much of the funding, I had to do it myself. I remember going to the bank, funny enough, and asking the bank for a loan. And this was the bank at the top of Claymont Road. What he said to me was, you want to set up a business in Mosside? I said, yes. He said to me, he's smiling, he said, there's no black business in Mosside. So how and why you want to set up? I said, I just feel and believe it will work. Bottom line is, he didn't give me the money, because he said he didn't see no black business in Mosside that are of an example, you know, that are as an example that he would be able to lend me the money, to give me the money. What he's basically saying, because there is no other black business in Mosside, he can't see an example of a black business to justify him giving me the money. He didn't. And I was, funny enough, I was speaking to a friend of mine who was in insurance business, and I told him about it. I said, I want to set up in Mosside. I want to come to Claymont Road because there's a building on Claymont Road that I see, and I want to own the building rather than renting it. And funny enough, I went to the guy. There was no sales sign on the building, and I just asked the gentleman who had it. It was a young couple, actually. And I asked them if they were selling, because they weren't using the shops. It was an ex-cafe, but you can tell the shop wasn't occupied. And they said, oh yes, we want to sell it. And what happened, I told my friend, and he had a friend in Liverpool who was working in the bank. And the friend in Liverpool rang me and asked me about it, and I said, yes, I'm interested in it. And he repeats himself, do you really want to open up a business in Mosside? And at the time, Mosside was very hot. There was a lot of things going on in the 90s, you know, in the 80s and 90s. So he came down, he looked on the building, he didn't stop. He just looked from his car and drove off and drove back to Liverpool. And then he came and he asked me again, do you really want it? I said, yes. And he made it happen. And he eventually got the building. And I set up the bakery business from there. It was a little slow, so I decided to add a grocery section to it just to pick up speed and to make it work. So it was a little difficult. There were times when I thought to myself, you know what, I want to pack it in. You know, but then I thought, if I do it, what example am I going to set? You understand? Especially with the bank manager telling me that there is no black business in Mosside, and he weren't able to give me the money because there was no black business there. So I just plod on to now, 2021. I'm still here, and now I've created Mark Fresh. Now I've got Radio Diamond. It's an internet come DAB based station.
It was a hostile environment. You know, they saw signs that said no blacks, no dogs, no Irish, which meant that they couldn't get housing. You know, people wouldn't rent them housing. It was very hard. So what they had to do is to club together. And I want Dion to just tell a little bit about the partner stories.
Okay, thank you very much, Anthony. But when a lot of people came here, they couldn't open bank accounts. They were basically told, no, you can't have a bank account. So the way they saved, a few people would get together and they would decide on how much they were going to put into the pot every week, whether it was £5, £10, and it was called the partner, which today is the credit union, which most of you will know it as. And they would put so much in each week, and then they would take in turn for somebody to get the money, and that's how they were able to send money home to look after their families. They were able to buy their own houses here, set up the business. So the partner and the partner lady, because it was usually a woman, they were the pivotal part of the black community. And when I came here in '67, that was the main thing. I was often sent, as I was in Jamaica by my grandma, to take the partner money. And then, you know, of course, Mum would go, when it was her turn to get the full amount, Mum would go and get it. And this is what I've written there. I've got my books here, Partner Money Stories, and I've written 2 volumes of Partner Money Stories, and these are the memories that I had when I came here, just like this, where people would get together, not just families. Somebody would bring the fish, somebody would bring the chicken, you know, somebody would make cake, like a spicy fruit cake, and then we'd all get together and eat and laugh and play music on the Blue Spot radiogram, you know, the old vinyl records. Those are my childhood memories.
In college, I went through the stage of realization about the UK, and that my ancestors had also been a contribution to this country, and that we have also put our mark in this country, and it always felt like it's like been wiped away. So through college, I set up a group, the first black group where we taught the history on the country and West Indian country, and also like mixing it with African culture, because we are very much African as much as we are Caribbean. And I feel like a lot of the stories that I've heard from the Caribbean about us getting here has been like people, England telling us what we could have got when we come to this country, or the benefits. And when we got here, it's kind of like they just send us anywhere, basically, and we'll just dash away. But it's like we still have survived, we're still here, and we're still putting a mark on this country. We have put a lot of influence into this country, and a lot of culture has come from the country that we've come from. And I think our story continues to live on through my generation, generations to come, and also your generation, because we are very powerful in the influence that we have on the world and within the UK.
My thoughts are that I feel that generation was betrayed slightly, because it was told that England was paved with gold and all sorts of fabricated stories, and I feel like the question I always want to ask that generation is, how come you didn't go back? Is it a pride thing? Did you come here and then think, I can't go back and show everyone back home that it's not what it was made out to be? And I always have these thoughts in my head. And just come to a place where you don't feel welcome and it's just not home. You know, like, as black melanated people, we need the sun. And we came here, there's a lack of sun. And my thing is, like, at what point do we assess things and think it's time to go back home? And I'm a strong advocate for repatriation, and that's something that I try to push, and I want people to explore, either going back to the Caribbean or parts of Africa and just tracing back their heritage and just seeing that there's more to life than just being residing here. And yeah, that's what I think.
What I've been told from my grandmother and my mother, back in that time, they felt that Queen Elizabeth was their mother, that it was the motherland. So England was the motherland, and they felt that they were coming to help their motherland. Some of them had already had relatives that had already come to England years before, decades before as well. Some of them were coming to continue to help with the family, help their family and do what they were doing over here. I think now it's time for our generations to turn it around for them. They didn't do it for no reason, and our forefathers didn't make that journey over here to help build it, so we could gain a better footing, a better first footing for us to just sit here and say, oh, well, that's it, it's over. We need to turn it around for them and let them know it was all worth it.
May is an inquisitive and bright little girl. She lives at the top of Mount Holly on the beautiful island of Jamaica with her grandma Magi. Dolly and her friends love to play in Grandma's Magi's mystical garden. Grandma Magi has the best games, and with her help she encourages them to dream big so that you can achieve all that you desire. Through teaching them about the achievements of positive role models of the past, she shows them that they too can become anything they want to be, from becoming a deep-sea diver to an astronaut, and there's no limit to their imagination.
Back to your question about British. Yeah. So when I came here, they lost all my documents from Jamaica. Yeah, this is real life, 2002.
They lost it, yeah.
So I had to put in the freedom of information finger with the Home Office to see where my stuff was.
Yep.
They made me sign on to the Home Office for 2 years. So I had to go, like a prisoner, to Salford, near Media City, and go and sign on to say I'm in the country.
It's wicked, isn't it?
It was terrible.
Wow.
Never been through it before. But now, every 2.5 years, I think this is my last one now, then I get unlimited. I get indefinite leave to remain forever.
Okay.
But that experience wasn't the nicest. Yeah, I didn't like it.
DLR.
Yeah, so every 2.5 years, I've got to apply to say I want to be here.
Yeah.
Imagine that.
Yeah.
From 02?
And you have to pay for it as well, innit?
Yeah.
You have to pay for it as well.
$2.5 grand.
Sometimes
See, people don't know these things because you don't. Every 2.5 years.
Like everyone's like, what?
You know, the people that have obviously been through that process now, like, where are they up to now? Like, have some of them been compensated?
Only about 5% have been compensated from the Windrush compensation scheme.
Yeah, they made the whole application process so hard and tedious.
Difficult.
For the ones to apply currently?
Yeah. And the rest are being just, like, taking the time with it, innit? With the application process and paperwork.
So they're still going through it?
Yes. So you've got
80
80-year-olds who are fighting to stay in the country. You know, you've got 70-year-olds who are going to hospital and saying, I've got stage 3 cancer. I've paid into the system for 50 years, help me out. They're like, nah, you're not a citizen. Leaving them to die.
To be fair, yeah, if I was like 79 years old and they said to me that I have to leave, I would leave.
Leave how?
If they told me to go back, to like Jamaica, if I'm Jamaican and if I'm like 80 years old, I don't have time to fight them to stay.
I know what you mean.
You're tired,
innit? You're tired.
Tired now. Like, I'm tired, innit? Like, I'm like 90 years old. Like,
why are you gonna continue
fight to live in this place for like 6 years and die? Yeah, but it's my whole life. But like, if I'm 80 years old, I'm not gonna fight to live like the rest of my life. I'll live in Jamaica if my Jamaican. In Jamaica, innit? Nah, but no, the family that you made is here, but the family that is in Jamaica is there still.
And the Jamaican, so you have to buy your land, you have to build your house, you have to have some.
That's what you do. That buy your.
But if he doesn't know at 80 years old that he's gonna get dashed out,
that's what from a young age, like we Nigerian and Ghanaian people, we have that thing where like our parents had already like built a house.
You get me?
So it's like if anything was to ever happen to like the war, you know, like I've got
now a lot of Jamaican people don't do that because that's not something they've
You've got to plan out like
that's not something they used to.
If I'm 8 years old, I'm gonna have at least places I know I can go if this doesn't like work out.
In 2007, come to 2008, my door badge, and just like other doormen, was up for renewal. So the club paid 209 quid plus documentation I provided I had sent off to SIA to get my door badge renewed. So while I was counting down the days and the months, all the doormen was getting their badges except me. So the key manager said, "Sam, what's happening?" Because you can check online what's happening to your badges, and it says all checks completed, so it was ready to be sent to me. So I rang SIA and inquired. I said, "I'm just inquiring my door badge. I've been waiting going 4 or 5 months." And that's where the bombshell came. They said, Home Office said, I did not exist. I'm not in the system. So I said, "Right, what do you mean?" I said, "We work in the fifth for the past 14 years. And I work for Birmingham Council, so what do you mean I don't exist? I've been over here 45 years. So I said to me, "I cannot do anything, Mr. Sweet, but give Home Office a ring and see what they say." So the next day, I finished work during the day and I went home. I rang the UK Border Agency and I told the guy my name and I inquired about my door badge, and I told him that SIA said that I cannot get my door badge because you lot said I didn't exist. And his response was, "I'm not in the system and I don't exist." I said, "What do you mean?" I said, "I've been working for Birmingham Council for 8 years and I'm working at Fifth Up for 12 years. I've been over here from 1967. And it came back and said to me, "You must stop working straight away. And where you work at, they must stop employing you because they'll be fined and I'll be prosecuted." So I said, okay. So I didn't know what to do. So I went to work at the council the next day and I was speaking to an Asian gentleman and I told him what happened to me. And he said to me, "There's a lot of this thing happening to people of colour." So he said to me, "Here's a number for Blackburn Law Centre, St John's Court." So he said, "Try them, they might help." So I gave him a ring at dinner time and I made an appointment and I went up there, I think it was the Tuesday at 2:30, and I saw this immigration officer. It was called Captain Limbachia. He said to me, "The Home Office need me to prove when I first came here, where I lived, where was I registered, which school. I must provide details that I've lived in the country from 1967 till 1983, which I haven't anyway, because I just didn't like flying again." So I started to try to get evidence and information. I went to Manchester Library. They provided me my school registry form. I went to my doctors to go back to when I first got registered in Manchester. I had pictures of my kids growing up. I seek help from Richard Lees, who's a Manchester City Council leader. He needed me for maybe most back in the day. I've done everything. Therefore, I've provided pay slip to show that I was working non-stop from the time they asked me for. My 2 jobs provided information to them. And they told me in Blackburn that it'll cost £880 to get the paper sorted out. But Catherine said to me, "This is not right. You should be paying again. You should be doing it for free." So I said, "Take the check back that Unison provided to me." And they sent them documentation off to London to the Home Office by recorded delivery. And I was working the council. I kept it quiet. I didn't want no one else to know. But at the club, I could not work because the Home Office said if I worked, they'll be fine, I'll be prosecuted. So I kept the club, the council job quiet, so I can sort it out before anyone found out. After about 4 months, Blackburn got in touch with me. They said there's good news and bad news. So I went up to Blackburn and they said to me, "The good news is that the Home Office received the documentation, Sam, and the bad news is that they said they lost it in the building." I said, "What do I do now?" And they said, "The Home Office said I need to do all over again." So I just said to him, "Listen, I can't do it again. It's been too long, it's too stressful." So I said, "Go home and think about it." So I went home, I went to the bed, and I woke up about 12 o'clock. I couldn't breathe. So the girlfriend panicked and phoned one ambulance. And they came and they said to me, "My rate is off the scale," so we had to get him to Blackburn quickly. Anyway, I went to Blackburn about 2:30 in the morning and they put me up with this machine I cut it short, and they said to me, they have to give me a drug, let me hurry, go back down. So they said they have to investigate what's causing this facile rate. So anyway, they said to me, I've got a problem at home. I said no, but I kept it quiet. I didn't tell them what I had going in my life. So anyway, after about, say, 3 days, it happened again. And I went back to Blackburn. They diagnosed I had SVT, supraventricular tachycardia, due to the stress and the way of the Home Office's treatment of me.
Well, in 1980, I'm not sure when Thatcher was elected in as the Prime Minister for England, but this was the time, and it was a very serious time within these inner city communities of ours. It was under great oppression. There was no jobs, no prospects for jobs. If you had an M16 postcode and you went in for a job, it was very unlikely to get it, and that's fact. That's not exaggeration in any way. The people were under pressure. Poverty, it was a poverty-stricken community. Still is, still today, you know. We look like we've got the mod cons, but we're just basically trailing behind. Getting back on track, 1980, seeing the arrival of a Prime Minister named Margaret Thatcher, one of very few female Prime Ministers to govern this country of ours. And they came with some serious laws. Some laws that were to affect the inner cities and the black communities more than anywhere. It was just a license given to the police for more harassment and more oppression. And this law, known today as a Section 60 stop and search law, where the police, if they wish and feel that you or anybody acting in a suspicious manner, could be stopped and searched. And as always, the black communities bore the brunt of these legislations, and Moss Side especially was one of those that was dealt with in the most severe and heavy manner concerning the police. Brutality was on the rise. People was known to be getting thrown into the back of vans, searched, even having nothing on them that is incriminating. They'd be beaten and thrown out back on the street. And it got to a point where it got too much. It was unbearable. And some of the elders of this community decided that enough was enough. And this is what they call the 1981 Moss Side uprisings. The uprisings took place in every black community in this country, and it was an expression of the oppression and the brutality that was upon them from the police, the people that are supposed to serve and protect, or was said to be serving and protecting, but they did nothing but harass and oppress and brutalise black communities especially. And if you noted that it was only the black communities that had these disturbances, they would call them riots. I call them the insurrections of the masses of the people, and that's what took place. I was 11 years of age in the riots, and I walked from West Stirling Way here all the way up Green Street, a young, curious young man, hearing sirens blazing through the night, seeing fire lighting up the night sky. And I became so curious that I actually walked from the back of my mother's house right up Cream Street to Princess Road, underneath what's known today as the Champs Camp, the Phil Martin Centre, which came up out of the ashes of the riots or the insurrections of the masses of the people. And I went into underneath the Champs Camp, which was the co-op, and just a young boy, excited as hell, in a place thinking that, you know, I've got all the crisps I could ever eat, all the chocolates I could ever eat, and I was just throwing them up in the air, like I became a golden wonder millionaire. But anyway, this was the moment in time. I was only 11 years of age, so I wasn't interested in anything more than crisp and chocolate. But anyway, I went into the co-op. A woman came by and said, you know, excuse me, is there any cigarettes? And, you know, sorry, love, there's no cigarettes left. Can you get me a pint of milk? So we went into the fridge. We was handing out pints of milk to local people. This is how impoverished we were, you know, and this was a white woman who came. You know, our community is a diverse community, it always has been. Black and white living cheek by jowl. They have been for generations here. There's never been a race problem here. The only race problems were is that the police picked on the black people of the community and the white people. They also got oppressed equally the same. We was in this thing together. As I said, it was an oppression on all of the inner cities and anybody who lived within them. Anyway, this woman came, we handed out pints of milk, whatever people came to request is what we gave them. I mean, this is how poor we were. People weren't concerned about, okay, there was a jewellery shop, for instance, on the corner of Great Western Street, which is now an Ethiopian restaurant called Mesab. That was a jewellery shop, the only jewellery shop. It was mainly Jews who had businesses in the area and owned most of the properties in these areas. But anyway, this jewelry shop was probably the first place to get looted, you know, because people were seriously in a situation whereby they had no funds, no money, and they were desperate. And in this insurrection, that was the first shop to be devoured. And there was many shops on Princess Road, shops that was owned by local people. Those shops were not touched. The rest of the shops, you would see them on fire. These were people who came out of the community and obviously made their wealth from the community but didn't live within the community. These were the shops that was targeted. But anyway, as I said, the tensions were high. It was a very serious time, and I just want to give big props to some of the real warriors of this community. The Poyser brothers, the Poyser twins, you know, who I see walking around in this day right now, you know, like just totally out of touch, should I say, because what those guys were interested in at the time was the liberation of their people, and they was up front, you know, in the demonstrations, and big respect to them because they shown me, you know, what it meant to stand up as a black man in a community being oppressed by police and to stand up against them and their oppression and their brutality. And they were brutalized. They were stuck in the back of the van and they were beaten severely and taken to the police station. And, you know, rest in peace to one of the twins who's passed away, sadly. I think there's still one of them with us. And it really hurts me to see that they're not given the help and assistance from our community, you know, our community leaders and the establishments that they're in. Anyway, we're glad to say that this Windrush Centre has now been liberated. And it's a sad story I'm not going to go into, but, you know, these people were of that generation of the insurrection of the masses of people. They were the people who were at the front line, fighting against oppression and you know, poverty and all of the rest of the things that afflicted this community. But the Poyser twins, I salute you guys, because personally I seen with my own eyes and heard your voices to say stand firm, stand firm, stand firm, nobody run, stand firm.
I'd come to the UK in '67 as a 6-year-old child. My dad was here in the UK. He'd come just after I was born as a citizen of the United Kingdom and Colonies. So my mum and myself and 4 siblings, we came up from Jamaica, and I went to school just down the road at Stretford Road Primary School. First thing I knew about colour was that the kids were coming up to me and saying, "What colour are you?" And I said, "Oh, what do you mean, what colour am I?" I said, "Are you a red or are you a blue?" And so it's then I found out that if you said the wrong colour, you're going to get beat up. And then, you know, some people will beat you up because you're black anyway. So my brothers, who were older, they thought that it'd be a good idea to teach me to fight because I was the youngest. So they would always stick up for me, defend me. So they did that. Then we moved to Stretford, and I went to primary school, Gorshill Primary School, and then I went to the grammar school in Stretford, and you know, that was our area, and there were like about 3 black families that I can remember that lived on our street, and so and we sort of like stuck together. But then I was taken back to Jamaica by my dad. My elder brother was left here in the UK, and we, my other older brother Paul, we got took to Jamaica, and I went to school at Jamaica College. And after 4 years, I decided I wanted to come back because all my friends were here, my older brother was here, and I just wanted to come back. So I came back, and then this was late 70s. Went to North Trafford College, and then we had to do our O-levels again because they didn't recognise the O-levels from Jamaica, even though it was a British colony and they still use the same sort of curriculum and everything. So I was planning to go to university after, and the North Trafford College teachers were saying that I was being treated as an overseas student. I couldn't understand why, so they said, you need to write to the Home Office. So this is when I wrote to the Home Office, and they said, yeah, you're a legal immigrant. You need to report to Manchester Airport to be deported. So at a similar time, the Mossad uprisings took place. So what had been happening for quite a number of years is that there was what's called the sus laws. It's a more intensive way of stopping and searching young black people. And then suddenly in Brixton, people reacted and challenged the police and burned down buildings. In Mossad, a similar thing happened. Everybody decided that, you know, they were going to make a stand. They weren't going to put up with this anymore. In Toxteth, it happened. In Handsworth, in Birmingham, in Leeds. So all the main black conurbations sort of went up in smoke, really. And, you know, you saw these images on television, because as I say, there are only 3 families that I knew. My mum used to go shopping here on Alexandra Road, and, you know, you see black people then. But it was then that, you know, your eyes sort of opened up to the much wider community and some of the issues that were going on. So I thought, well, I've got to go down there. I just felt that, you know, I had to come and see what was happening. So I remember coming to Princess Road and sitting on the grass verge just near Great Western Street and seeing, you know, 97 Princess Road. It had all been burnt out. The end of the block was burnt out as well, and just the place was just messed up. And I was sitting there thinking, you know, what could I do about this?
Well, what I can say is they left the community after the uprising. They left the community to suffer, to wallow in its demise. You know, burnt down shops, no facilities. They made us feel, you know, that you're gonna feel, you know, we're gonna leave you guys to wallow in the burnt out buildings and the bricks and the rest of the debris that was left behind after the disturbances. So they gave us no help for some considerable time and left us to kind of, you know, suffer. We was always suffering, so it made no difference whether there were a few burnt buildings around us. We were in a suffering. This was an expression of anger, of oppression, of years of oppression, and this is the outcome of it. But as I said, as far as progress is concerned, I wouldn't say that, because straight afterwards there was an influx of drugs into the community. Where it came from, I don't know, but I'm sure it was intentionally targeted. This area was intentionally targeted for the drug trade, to break down the unity of the people and soften them up a bit and make them feel like they can acquire some wealth. This wealth wasn't the kind of wealth that we needed, because it brought everything else that wasn't good for this community with it. We had no idea. We was the first generation to be victims of this influx of drugs, and, you know, all of a sudden people were able to make money. So they wasn't interested in anything else. You starve someone for so long, and they're gonna just go find money by any means necessary. That's just the natural nature of mankind. You know, you starve him, he's gonna have to go out and look for food. This is the laws of the jungle. But as I said, yeah, not much has changed. Well, it's just starting to change. And I believe that my generation, who bore the brunt of the first, you know, we were the first victims of the influx of drugs in this community. And now, having been through what we went through, a lot of us served time in prison. We did our, you know, we paid the price for what we did, and now we're trying to rebuild this place brick by brick. And we are the ones with the understanding of it. We were the ones from that generation that seen, you know, the insurrection of the masses of people and what it meant to us. So it's only really our generation that can really start to unfold, you know, the mysteries and, you know, the misconceptions that people have of this area, which is a beautiful area with some very beautiful people in. They said that the neighbourhood never lacked talent. We lacked resources. We lacked you know, places and facilities to be able to express ourselves and bring an economy, so to speak, to this area that was been impoverished for so long. But finally, I believe we're on our way. We're getting things together. We've come of age now, as you can see. The hairs are grey. We still have strength in our bodies and a little bit of fire, you know what I mean? And we intend to make things better for the next generation. And we don't ever want to see our communities exploding and imploding, and and having to rise up to express themselves to the government in a way that isn't good for us or beneficial for us, that will always use against us. But as I said, we're from the generation that are going to make that change, and I'm going to devote the rest of my time to bringing that change about. And I hope by the time I see my demise that things will be moving in the right direction for the community and the youngsters of this community. And we want to invite them all also to come behind us and watch what we do and learn, so that when our community leaders pass away, we have immediate successors who can step in line just like any other organisation. But we need to organise ourselves, and as I said, the phoenix has come out of the ashes now, and we're going to rebuild this place brick by brick. And I hope Mossad never has to see a disturbance like it did them back then in 1981.
The Commonwealth Games has adapted to the changes that are being faced, not only in the world, but in the Commonwealth. It is no secret that the Commonwealth as an institution faces a number of challenges with the changes that may take place with the Queen as the head of the Commonwealth and what that means to existing Commonwealth countries. The Queen is seen as the unifier, and Barbados realizing its independence was a shock to everybody in the Commonwealth, because it was least seen as the most likely to leave the Commonwealth as it did. However, many countries are looking at what the future holds, but that's why the Commonwealth Games is still so important. Albeit coming with the birth of Empire Games, the Friendly Games, the Commonwealth Games now is taking on a relevance, and the current president, Dame Louise Martin, has sought to make the Games more relevant with regard to sport development for peace, to be able to provide hope and opportunity that would go beyond the sporting medals, but into areas of equality, diversity, inclusion through sport, and addressing some of the social issues that are faced by the Commonwealth. So the Commonwealth sports ministers meet prior to a Commonwealth Games, normally before an Olympic Games, but in this case, before the Commonwealth Games. But we're all looking at the issues of how we address the youth issues facing the Commonwealth through the Games. So for example, the Commonwealth Youth Games, which will be hosted in Trinidad and Tobago, will be looking at not only identifying talent for the future in sport, but developing sporting bursaries, developing vocation and training, looking at how we can help deliver the Sustainable Development Goals in educational equality, gender equality, carbon and climate change issues. These are all important issues that are not only taxing the Commonwealth Games Federation, but the Commonwealth member countries. So the Commonwealth Games, I think, has a future because it will be able to adapt and respond to the countries that make up the Commonwealth Games, 72 nations and territories. And at the end of the day, I think everyone will agree on the basis of the Birmingham Games that as we look forward to 2026 in the state of Victoria, is that there is much to look forward to and a future that we can look forward to.
Commonwealth actually means that everybody is on an equal footing. What we know, that's not the case. In terms of Britain, Britain started its slave trade in 1562. And then they started bringing lots of Africans involuntarily to the Caribbean as enslaved people. And later on, those places became colonies. And those colonies later on were part, when slavery was ended, became part of the colonial system, the imperialist system of Britain, yeah? And which the imperialist means that they dictate and manage and govern. Later on, I think it was in the 1920s, they created the Commonwealth, the idea of a Commonwealth. And the old idea of that was that at some point, those countries, those territories and colonies, because they weren't countries at the time, would then be able to self-govern or partially self-govern themselves, with Britain still being part of still managing those countries. Even later on, when those countries became independent, it is still the case that Britain still manages the legal system. And take, for instance, Jamaica. The Queen is called the Queen of Jamaica. So that's what my understanding is of Commonwealth. And at the moment, I'm not certain exactly what they're doing for the people of these various countries.
Well, it's been independent technically since 1966, where Barbados became independent, but they still have the Queen as the head of state. So I don't know how independent that would have really made them. But in 1966, when it became independent, that's what led the fellow Bajans over here to put together the Barbados Association and celebrate their independence every year in November. But like you said, because the Queen was the head of state, I don't know how, for me, I don't feel that we were that independent if we still had her as the head of state. But now being a republic, and we've removed her, removed the monarchy, to me, this is now our chance to actually really be independent. So for me, this is now our independence. And I think this will help us now to move forward in a more positive way for us as a people, rather than you move forward and then you get stopped because now you have to have permission and stuff like that. So they said that we were independent, but for me, we were never independent, because if we were independent, we'd be able to do what we want to do. Also, we still had to get, well, it got rid of that after a while, but we used to have get visas to come to England. Well, if she's our head of state and they're still running us, why do we have to have permission to come into the country, etc., etc.? And they didn't have permission to come into ours. So that soon moved. I think it was Grantley that removed that. But yeah, as an independent, I think it's better now as a republic, and I really have a lot of faith in the Prime Minister that we have right now.
So Prime Minister Motley committed a revolutionary act. That revolutionary act was to demonstrate objective, independent thought. We are programmed with a too black virus, and anything that would allude to our independent self-determination is considered too black. It's a European programming to the African detriment. And when we adopt it, like we've adopted the brand of black, which is only a brand, it's not an ethnicity, it's only a social construct. And that social construct of black is the only thing that keeps the racial hierarchy in which white is at the top of the totem pole alive. No black, no white. So understand that first of all. So Prime Minister Motley's independent thought, which I said was a revolutionary act, in decapitating the Queen as head of state, then goes into the people's thinking. This is where we introduce the media to protect the minds of our people with a counter narrative to the European messages that keep us in ever decreasing circles. So what she did after that was reach out to Ghana to make trade agreements, but also to observe reparations. And I don't speak of the economic reparations, which is our job to draw down on from Europeans who were the architects of the African Holocaust, but the psychological and spiritual reparations in the carrying of bones, in the observance of certain spiritual ceremonies, so that we understand now we are one people of one accord, irrespective of our location on planet Earth. These were all very important tenets observed within what we saw was the embryonic stages of Bajan independence. This can't be underestimated and is actually a black print for anybody else seeking independence. So when we'll look at Jamaica and a representation of governance, there is no African Caribbean governance of Jamaica. The governance of Jamaica is British. All of these West Indian colonies were merely set up as economic outposts for Britain to utilize free labor to bring the capital back to Britain, to enrich English people, so that the most lazy of English people would benefit as a byproduct, just in terms of the infrastructure that was created. So Lloyd's Bank being able to increase their insurance capacity, being able to increase their loaning capacity, the great unwashed would benefit just as a byproduct of us toiling away in the hot sun in these outposts where it wasn't seen, unlike in America, where they still operate slave codes. That's why you'll have racism in the UK, but they don't operate in slave codes like in the States, because they did it on terra firma in real time, and those legacies were handed down. We were out of sight and out of mind. And when we arrived, we had a different type of racism. So all that is being established between the Caribbean and African nations is a sovereignty that takes European autonomy of those nations out of the picture. The key is to agree in principle, and if you agree in principle, agree, adopt, apply. Very simple 1, 2, 3 step process. Agree, adopt, apply. If Barbados is the most effective practice, take all of the documentation, agree, adopt, apply. It's very simple. It's not about waiting. It's not about offending Europeans. It's not about cutting off your nose to spite your face. Independence is about governance. And when I spoke about education, the first governance is of the mind. Close the doors and windows, be secure to external infiltration, external influences which are adverse to your economy and the best upkeep of the people of your nation. And then you're about the socio-economic growth of your people, which can only impact on the nation.
Initially, I think it's a great idea, but already I think that we've seen some kickback from remaining Commonwealth countries and some of those countries who have kind of like trade deals and stuff with the Caribbean countries, and the way in which they're just treating them and speaking about them. And clearly it's going to be a good thing to have your own autonomy. I think if there's anything that could be seen as positive about the Commonwealth is this intergovernmental type of political conversations that they're having to ensure that, or the plan is to ensure that there's a common kind of like thread or understanding or theme. It's not a wealth because the wealth isn't common. So I think, I don't know enough about, you know, geopolitical stuff globally to comment wholly or fully on it. But in the interim, I always think it's a good thing for Caribbean islands or black people just to be able to self-determine their own future.
I think for me, and what made me so excited about these games in Birmingham was being able to engage with the Caribbean and African nations even. It's worth noting the Afro-Caribbean diaspora make up the majority of the Commonwealth Games nations. So when you see heads of government, ministers, presidents of federations, when you see all of that leadership potential, as well as leadership experience and wisdom, you know, I reconnected with Commonwealth leaders that I hadn't seen for 20 years, for 10 years. And what you got was a sense that change in institutions of this kind is also slow, but on the nature of the games, and there were so many forums of discussion and dialogue taking place, and I was fortunate enough to have so much discussion and dialogue with those Commonwealth member countries, they are feeling more emboldened that they can help and shape the Commonwealth moving forward. And the Games is the only vehicle in which they feel that can happen. It's worth noting that the Commonwealth Heads of Government was hosted in Kigali, Rwanda, a month prior to the Games. That was obviously because of the cancellation of the Commonwealth Heads of Government because of COVID. But what made it so different and what made it so exciting by way of the art of the possible is everybody waking up to that fact. Change is and must come. What does that change look like? And how much of a role will be played by those Commonwealth member countries. It's worth noting the Commonwealth institutions are unique. Whether you have a small island of the Commonwealth that may have thousands of inhabitants, and you might have India as the emerging Commonwealth superpower that has 1 billion citizens, their vote is equal. 1 vote, 1 nation. Now that's unique as far as democracy is concerned. But the one thing the African Caribbean diaspora have realized is that they can play a more prominent role, and what more unifying agenda than the future citizens of the Commonwealth. And when we talk about the future, and when I talk about the future and I look to the future, I'm looking at the future leadership that will represent the Commonwealth in those nations, the young citizens of the Commonwealth, of which half of the Commonwealth citizens are young, and by young I mean up to the age of at least 25. So we have to start looking at the global benchmarks of the Sustainable Development Goals. We have to look at how the Commonwealth Games will help deliver against those global benchmarks. And the Commonwealth Games Federation is looking at aligning itself in being something more than just about the winning. So I think the future is bright, because I think these games have alerted people and woken people up to the absolute diversity of inclusion and equality that must shape policy, projects, programs, initiatives. So the Commonwealth Youth Games in Trinidad next year, that heralds what everyone's been asking for. When will the Commonwealth Games be hosted in the Caribbean or on the African continent? Those are the questions that are now being asked, and I believe will now start to be answered very, very soon. So I'm an eternal optimist. I have to look at what the art of the possible is and can and must be. And when you see the diversity of the opening ceremony in Birmingham and all of those Commonwealth countries, I will challenge anybody on the diversity of that powerful statement that the Commonwealth represents, and why we can't see social, culture, and even economic and political change realised as a result.
The diaspora now can really become more involved. I think I would hope that the government in Barbados now will embrace the 2nd, 3rd and 4th generation of the diaspora, because I think that the diaspora at first we started, and yeah, I'm the 1st generation to be born here, and I'm okay. I get my citizenship through my parents, but then my children, they couldn't get citizenship through their grandparents, which I thought was wrong, because if I marry a Jamaican, an Indian, whoever, they automatically can get citizenship. So why can't my children, who can only trace themselves back to Barbados? But I think that now is in procedures of changing. So for me now, Barbados now can now lean upon or involve that diaspora, those 3rd and 4th generation. And instead of, I've always said this, like my parents, they came here, spent all their life here working hard, putting all their youth into England, building it. Nothing happened in Barbados. Then we come, we put all our youth and all our energies in England again, nothing Barbados. Why? Really, I should be putting all my experiences that I've got now, going back to Barbados, not when I retire, that I'm just going to sit down and not do anything, but go back sooner and put something into Barbados, so then they can reap. Do you know what I mean from that, if that makes sense? So for me with the diaspora, that's what I would be excited for, that now, say this, like yourself, you know, can take your talents and your skills and go back in Barbados and help to build Barbados economically, whatever your trade is. And that's what I'm excited about with the diaspora.
They don't have trust. They don't trust each other. You can't trust each other if you don't have a community. A community comes first. Once you get a community and you get to know people, then you move up to the next level, you trust them. Once you learn how to trust people, then you move up to the 3rd level, you begin to cooperate with them. And once you learn how to cooperate with them, then you get to the 4th level, you start holding them accountable for what they're doing wrong. The same thing in business. In business, if you're building a business operation, and competitiveness and powernomics is a 5-story building. The first thing you all should be doing, as I said, get you some institutions like the chamber and started teaching, acquiring wealth and power through operating businesses. If you build an economy, that's a 5-story building. The first floor must always be economics. Always build an economy before you do everything else. The first floor is the economy.
Over the course of 20 odd years, I've been through different organizations, had business and known us in a number of guises of life. Let's say from the pavement all the way through to having colleagues where we could sit down in a private members club. And I've seen the gaps that are between us, but also the commonalities. Mine is more to focus on the commonalities. And when I saw that we had a lot more in common than we did that was adverse to each other, I decided to set up the Solution Room, which was really a think tank to get in the brightest and best of us that I'd meet throughout business and various solutions. And then I realized that I had such an inordinate amount of contacts that it required an institution rather than an individual. And it's still not at that stage where it's fully systemized and mobilized to really draw down on all of our strengths. But I realized that where we were lacking was in a clear institution that could lead us, protect us, and really galvanize our economics as a block. This is what I call ethnic aggregation. So that when you see Chinese, you think of them as a clearly identifiable economic block. And you'll look at a Chinatown, and you'll look at anything that they do nationally in terms of coming into Africa. You don't think about the individual company that's coming into Africa to mine. You think about the ethnic aggregate of Chinese. And that is why we set up ADPAC, literally to create the ethnic aggregate of Africans and African Caribbeans in the UK. And the whole point of ADPAC, just like the Board of Jewish Deputies, just like the Sikh Council, just like the Islamic Council, is to have an identifiable body in the UK that any African nation can reach out to. So for instance, if Uganda has just identified trillions in gold reserves for mining, it shouldn't necessarily be that the first port of call is Chinese or Americans or British firms. Imagine that there are multi-millionaires in the UK that can come together as consortium to purchase mining equipment, where we could create a direct partnership with any African nation so that we're not raping the land and removing people from their land, but purely mining for the mutual benefit of intra-African trade. That would be a very different proposition than we experience today. But in the absence of an institution, who do you speak to? How do you galvanize those Pan-African diaspora millionaires who could actually make it possible for these kind of ventures to happen? There is no recognizable body. And then sometimes in the absence of that recognizable body, when the opportunities are there, they attract particular characters who don't have our community's best interests. And you can see that their lives aren't congruent with what they might espouse in rhetoric when the opportunities pop up.
So we're talking about the, I guess, emerging markets and how the connection between the diaspora and those, countries from the continents and those from the West Indies, from the Caribbean culture, how those two coming together can really be a formidable economic power. And I think one of the biggest benefits that would be there for us to take advantage of is the sharing of knowledge, the sharing of how the technologies that are emerging in these markets as well can be used across both sides of the coin. So from the Caribbean standpoint, it's safe to say that we're quite behind in terms of the technology aspect and how that's utilized. I think from an economic standpoint, it helps us to try and level the playing field with the bigger powers out there, so the UK, the US, China, etc. And the diaspora can provide that in terms of us connecting together, trying to build a more united front in the ways that we share information, in the ways that our economies can build and grow within each other and from each other. And as far as, I guess, continuing somewhat of a legacy of, you know, us being more of a bridge for each other. So from the West Indies to Africa, how we can kind of make sure that gap is a lot closer today, and how we can, I guess, lean on each other in terms of our economies and the things that we can do to leverage each other's resources and try and build as a strong a bridge as possible moving forward.
You know, I was prompted to start the organization we call TIFE Decide as a result of my own experience in business. Many years ago, those of you who know me remember that we had the opportunity to make the first birthday cake for Prince William. And from there, our business grew, and we learnt a lot about the business world in that experience. One of the things I learned was just how few black businesses there were. And through the course of this business activity, I learned about the barriers. And of course, I realized that most groups have a resource that they can call upon that belongs to them, whether it's the Asian, the Jewish, the Chinese communities, or any other large community group has a central resource. But I discovered that the black community didn't have a central resource. It always had to go outside of itself to find the resources, the means to do anything. And I wondered what would happen if we owned our own resource. And that's the challenge that possessed me for many, many years and caused me, initially, over 25 years ago, to have a go. And I set up what was known then as a High Place Syndicate. But that was to be our time at college, if you like. We learned then about some of the things that you do and some things that you don't do. Some things went well and some things didn't go so well. But I always knew that it was still right for the black people to have their own resources. And so that's what prompted me to take the step to say, you know what, it's nobody's job. It's not the government's job. It's not the Jamaican government's job. It's not the Nigerian government's job. It's not the British government's job to get us going. So I realized there was nobody doing anything about it. And that's why I called the organization TIFE Decide. This was going to be a group of people who would do something about it. And that's what TIFE Decide means. Thank you for doing something about it.
So yeah, I'm the president for the Minerals Committee for Sable Ascent, which is a Pan-African cryptocurrency and remittance company. And what gives it its validation is we peg the cryptocurrency to minerals such as gold, which validates it. I feel in regards to economics, our solutions lay with us thinking outside the box and thinking how can we create something that sits outside of the system. So we're just in the current process of negotiating gold deals with a lot of countries on the continent to build up a gold reserve, which will be pegged to the currency. In regards to education, I feel it's imperative that we teach young people to find a way to generate an income through what they're passionate about.
You know, sometimes people ask me what success will look like if TIFE Decide achieves all its endeavors. And I always think to myself, that's a really important question because sometimes we can be busy, but not always effective. So I thought to myself, what are the two effective things that we want to achieve through TIFE Decide? Well, the first thing is a change of mindset, where we stop thinking negatively, stop thinking that we can't, and also stop thinking that if someone is doing it, then there must be something wrong with them or with their idea. And therefore we're looking for each other's faults all the time. And the second thing, of course, is not just mental, but it's physical. We actually want to do something about it. So I'm stood here in the Romeo and Juliet restaurant, which is part of the Shakespeare Hotel. I'm showing off our new menu today, which is receiving rave reviews online. And it's a joy for me when I see the local community coming and eating our food and getting so excited and saying they didn't know anything about Caribbean food, that it was so tasty. You know, and asking us, what's happened to you guys? Why is it taking you so long to come out into the open like this and to have a high street facility in the middle of a theatre district? But I want to say to you, I would like us to see these things happening on a repeated basis. First of all, a change in attitude, and then secondly, a determined effort to own more and more businesses. Now, it doesn't happen because somebody has a smart idea or because one of us is charismatic or has leadership skills. I'm telling you now, we will get nowhere if we're depending on an individual and their charisma to take us where we want to go. Until we behave like a people, until we join together and stop looking for each other's faults, until we make, each of us make our £2 count, we can't do things like this. We're after 1 million people putting £2 a week into the same fund. For the first time in history, black people could control £2 million a week. We know it's a tall order, and then many people will think, oh, it can't be done. But you know that your £2 wouldn't change your lifestyle. But something might still hold you back from getting involved. And that's what we want to see happen. If Taif Desai is successful, places like this, one by one, can be owned by us.
Today with L.A. Edwards, the author of the amazing book Halo Hattie, and just a quick chat we had offline, but I think just speaking to you just now, well, your mum really, it's going to be quite, an intriguing story. So tell us about, Halo Hattie. How did you come up with the concept? And just, kind of what people can expect from reading the book.
Yeah, absolutely. So Halo Hattie is a story of a 9-year-old girl from a single parent family. And from that alone, you can clearly tell that this book is made with context. It's made with a certain iron vision so that children can see that positive things can happen when you come from a single parent family. We want to try and break the stereotype immediately. And so that's one of the first things. And second to that is that we want a book that has a black female protagonist. The statistics of black female protagonists in children's fiction specifically very, very low. It's shockingly low. I've had an article written in the Birmingham Mail about Halo Hattie, and it outlines all of these statistics. And it really shows that we need a book like this for over sevens. We have lots of educational books, we've got lots of history books, and all of those things are needed, absolutely needed. But in the children's fiction section specifically, it's very low. So that's the second thing. And the third thing, I've always wanted to be an author. I am the daughter of 2 rock stars, literally. You've met one of them, and clearly. And the other thing that led me to finish this book, it took 10 years to finish this book. It took a very long time. And what spurred me on in the last 10th year is that on the same weekend I had my uncle and my rock star father, who sadly passed away. And it was very sudden, and it was, very tragic for both sides of the family. And that's when I realised I needed to finish this book.
Your mum was telling me earlier, Harry Potter levels, is basically where you guys get. Well, what's next in terms of, are there other books in the works, other publications that we should look forward to?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because what comes to mind when I think about that is one of the things that I truly believe is that unconditional love is the purest form of who you are. And it took 10 years to write this book. The book starts with a prayer, it ends with a prayer. And it ends with, I don't want to give too much of the story away, but it ends with a child feeling like they've been seen, feeling like they've been heard, feeling like they're understood, because it's based within black culture. And with that, you then have the journals that come with that. The journals are to help children with confidence and inspire them to dream big. And from that, we've then developed the book hampers. And I say all of that to say is because underlying everything that we do and underlying exactly where we're going with the vision is that unconditional love. So all the characters have an unconditional love either for their vocation or their friend or their family. And then with that, it's unconditional love from me. It's like a love letter in this book. It's taken 10 years to write, to perfect it. And in the end, the way in which I had to finish the book, I was actually, sent on this mission really since the passing of my uncle and my father. So everything about this is built upon unconditional love. So therefore, the vision for this is exactly that.
CEO of Calix, the man himself, Raf. And it's always interesting when I meet people who are in the entrepreneurial, game, and they've obviously been, I want to say established, but I know you probably might argue with me.
Still growing.
Yeah, it's definitely still growing, but the products are amazing.
Thank you.
I've had the pleasure of obviously tasting them as well, but I wanted to find out first and foremost, how has this year's expo been? Were you here last year as well?
No, it's our first time
first
here.
one.
Yeah.
So how did you find it today?
I'm loving it. It's great to see a lot of exciting brands. It's great to be able to network, meet loads of other businesses, and to actually see the growth happening within the community where people are now able to come out and actually show their amazing jobs that they're all doing in their different spaces. I started with my mom's recipe, which is our Calix Zobo original. And I took that idea to Chester University and pitched it to them. They loved it so much. They supported to design it from a product made at home into a commercial product. Obviously with my own educational background, because I did my first degree in microbiology and brewing, and I did my master's in food quality management at the University of Salford, who happens to be here as well, actually supporting this event. So it's been great to reconnect with the university. Yeah, so for us, we manufacture all our products ourselves from start to finish in our own SALSA-approved facility based in Burnley. Towards the end of last year, we started getting a lot of requests because obviously the market is now grown post-COVID, demanding healthy, natural products. And based on that and based on the demand that people are having for this kind of product range, we started getting a lot of requests from other brands or other people having similar ideas, still at home, still in the kitchen, not knowing what to go about it, or existing brand currently in the market, but trying to innovate and take themselves more into retail, start talking to us, and now we co-pack for others as well. So we help them design products in the case of those that are starting from scratch, or those that already exist and trying to take it to the next level of scale up. Then we're helping them to do that within our facility because our machines run at 22 bottles a minute. Our facilities are approved, and obviously innovation is the core of what we do at Calix Street.
Today with Adiola and Jane, the founders of Cultureville. Came very highly recommended. I'm just saying, and obviously I've had the chance to see the products. Amazing, first off, so I think it's all fantastic. And we were talking offline earlier, but in terms of your, I guess, perception and experience so far at this year's Black Businesses Expo, how's it been so far?
So we've actually, it's our first year at the Bob Expo and we're so excited to be here. And it's a really interesting space because you never see these many Black-owned businesses in one space. And I think it's really a testament to how much we have to offer, because here you can get everything from food to drink to clothes to accessories to anything like you can think of. There's a business, a Black-owned business that represents that. And it's just so nice to see your own doing it. Because a lot of the times we walk into spaces that are not a lot of people who look like us present. And so here, we are the majority, we are the shoppers, we are the consumers, we are the business owners, and it goes to show how much we're really capable of, so I love it.
Yeah, it makes me think like of something our mentor always says, which is we're not a minority, we're a global majority. But like the mentality is like we're a minority, but we're not. Like, yeah, it's been incredible. I think it's so much more than I expected. It's the network, it's the meeting other business owners, uplifting one another. It's the it's just incredible. Like it's the access to banks and expertise and people who know about finance and funding and really want to support us and really want to have our backs, and that means so much. Yeah.
Okay, so Cultureville is an African-inspired clothing brand that specializes in high-quality, ethically sourced, sustainable African print clothing and accessories. And the heart behind our business is to sort of change the perspective of Africa. Often there's this line that like Africa needs saving from an outside party, but no, we want the narrative to be like we have immense talent and passion to offer the world, and Africa is just like a hub of talent that's still yet to be tapped. And so through Cultureville, we're trying to do that. So we are really passionate about working with local artisans who are super duper talented. They handcraft our items and they're super high quality. And so I can't rave about it enough because that's really the heart of what we do, really showcasing African culture. And so we work with a team of women who are in Africa who are making the items and they do it to a super high quality. So that's what Cultureville is all about, really.
Anything to add, Adiola?
Yeah, I mean, she said so much. Our team is in Lagos, Abuja, Accra, Kumasi, you know, and we love working with local people. We want to invest in the communities where the culture comes from. And that is really what keeps us going on the hard days when you don't want to do business anymore and you want to run back to that 9 to 5. That's what keeps you going.
So we're joined today with Ian Coleman, the author of Love My Hair, at this year's Black Business Expo. So a bit earlier, saw the fantastic books you've got and really impressed, you know, with kind of just the entire layout. I wanted to know, first of all, is this your first time at the Expo, or were you here last year as well?
Okay, this is my first time. First time at the Expo.
How are you finding it so far?
Yeah, it's been great. I mean, the people are so excited and enthusiastic, and just you can feel the buzz of, wow, we have, you know, we could buy everything here because it's all for us. Yep, so this is my first book. I started about 2018. For me, the process is quite long because I'm quite fussy. So the whole, the printing and the illustrations, that process is a long process. And interestingly, it's been worth it because what people comment is on, love the illustrations, so it's worth it. I got into it because I went to school. My brother and I were the only children of colour in my school. And we used to go to the library, obviously watching telly, no people of colour. And so as I grew up, I thought, if we're here, if people with disabilities are here, if people of colour are here, why can't we see ourselves in books? But for me, it's all about producing books that reflect diversity. So my book is very diverse. I do lots of schools, and so the children ask the same question. And then one child put their hand up and said, have you got anybody in it with melanin skin? Have you got anybody in it with... And I was just like, exactly. I could just, you know, no, I couldn't get everybody in. So, but for me, like, again, I haven't got enough disabilities in this book until the next book. So all the books, there's lots of different books. I've written 4, but I'm just waiting for the illustrations. And but they all reflect diversity. So one's actually about, so Leah, who is here today, she was the inspiration for this one. Oh, wow. Because she loves her hair, natural, messy, loves it. But she also loves food. So I've done one about food. And then there's other books, yeah. So there's about 4. Yeah, one about Christmas. Oh wow. So yeah. So there's a lot to come.
The second floor is your politicians. Don't worry about voting. You don't have to vote. People that got money, whether it's organized crime or wealthy people, they don't have to vote. You take your money on the first floor and you buy every politician on the second floor.
What I was surprised to find when I was elected in May 2021, the very first thing I wanted to do was have a councillor who was responsible for Windrush. So it wasn't a paid position, it would just be one councillor who was a link within the council. And despite the fact that 60 out of the 94 councillors I talked to all supported it, the leadership squashed it and it didn't go to a vote. And I think the reason behind that was they didn't want a black councillor to be seen to have any power, particularly someone who wasn't content just to sit and be a councillor, but wanted to bring in more councillors of African heritage. So the real problem was the pipeline project. The problem was that I wanted to have at least 10 African heritage councillors on Manchester City Council. And the last thing they wanted was somebody with a profile who was also trying to do that.
We need to be in every single political party. However, not necessarily who those political parties would attract, but we need to be highly intentional about infiltrating those political parties so that we're highly influential. We also need to have our own political vehicles. If you think about the Green Party and Greenpeace, Greenpeace goes out and creates all of the awareness of the environmental issues. Then all the Green Party need to do is gently mirror what Greenpeace says and galvanize and harness the energies of the people for voting purposes, irrespective of whether they get elected in local elections or national elections. Their influence is felt, and the influence of the Green Party and Greenpeace now impacts on environmental policy. So if we proliferate all political parties with African and African Caribbean people who are specifically intentional about our socio-economic growth, and we have our own political vehicle, and then from the outside, we have the super PACs that are actually galvanizing the people to vote within our interests. This is how we become highly influential. But at the moment, politics attracts people who have aggressive personal ambitions. I think those ambitions are very limited because politics offers a limited form of success. It does open doors in terms of introductions for self-interest for those who lobby, but other than that, it's very limited. And coming down to the first pillar of Powernomics, which is economics, what I identified when I was in business for myself is that I could hold an event with my own money and it didn't hurt me. I didn't have to ask anybody anything. And just like George Soros would do on a macro level, I could invest that capital, draw down on people who were supporting my endeavors, and then through that, propagate, and then them as brand evangelists will carry it out into the world. Now, if I could do that with my own business, imagine what we could do if we ethnically aggregate, or if we were utilizing our influence as a super PAC to impact on political parties, the political process, and legislation and policy.
My thoughts on political parties specifically set up to address BAME issues is they are important. We need a whole range. Just because a party doesn't necessarily get elected, it doesn't mean that they don't have any power. If you look at UKIP, Nigel Farage got hardly any MPs, but he managed to change the entirety of Tory policy. The reason Brexit happened was because of Nigel Farage. They moved so far to the right because they were terrified of losing votes to UKIP. And people go, oh, well, you haven't got any MPs, you don't have power. You can still have power. As an opposition, you can have power. As a pressure group, you can have power. And I would support anyone who wanted to set something up. So, for instance, in Moss Side, because I know a lot about this particular ward, there are 13,000 people eligible to vote. In the last local election, not even 3,000 turned out. So if you could get maybe 2,500 people to turn out, you could elect an independent councillor in Moss Side, and it's easier in wards like this where not many people turn out to vote.
But I think what's happening is I see a dissection. First of all, I see a different experience for people from the Caribbean community. And whether we like it or not, we are having a different experience in terms of trying to achieve race equality than I think any of those other communities that I've just listed there. And I only briefly just took a few from the top of my head. There's a sort of a lack of acceptance or somehow a difficulty people perceive with dealing with our communities more than any other. And it is that which keeps bringing race equality back to the agenda, because we can always talk about a more disenfranchised experience than any of those other communities. So it seems that if we were all starting from this same level of saying we want to achieve race equality, that very quickly we start to see a disparity with progress. Some people are more accepted for the way they look, for the way they convey their messages, for what they are prepared to push forward, for, you know, what's the message they're trying to bring when they're saying race equality. For some, it might be a seat at the decision-making table. For some, it's about receiving equal funding to other voluntary groups. But it seems like when we start to look at the African Caribbean community, I'm saying my community, I'm from Jamaican heritage, we see a different thing altogether. We see it differently in housing, we see it differently in health, employment, education, policing, the law system. And so this very different and difficult experience that is our life's experience, because it's what we wake up with, you know, we don't get a chance to shelve any of that, is particular, I would say, for people like me.
And once you rent or lease those politicians or buy them on the second floor, you hold them accountable to go to the third floor. And you stop the police from shooting and killing black folk all the time and come up with new codes of conduct.
Understand the nature of power when you're talking about law and justice. Not only power, but understand the nature of societies. In that every single one of the Europeans in the higher echelons of the police and the higher echelons of the court system and justice system, barristers, solicitors, all belong to societies. We come in with a much more naive mindset in that we are working for our personal ambition as a solicitor, as a barrister, as police, and don't understand the power dynamic of belonging to societies and being able to share a common agenda with a common thread. You start out when you build power with common values. Those common values lead to common practices. Those common practices lead to common outcomes. So look at our role within the criminal justice system. We are, again, the subjects, right, by and large. And those who operate within the criminal justice system have very little power. So let's just flip that coin, because all you're seeing is the branches and the leaves of the tree. Let's now use our imagination and pretend that we have a society where not only do you see the branches and the leaves of the tree, but there are roots that go deep underground. And those roots are far more wide-reaching than the branches and the leaves of the tree that you see, where there are conversations that are had, there are values that are shared, and there is an agenda that is come to where we actually execute that on a daily basis, equally as much as Europeans. The outcomes for African and African Caribbean people in the UK would look very different. Now, that has to be underwritten by our economics, which is the first pillar. Education plays a big part because those in that society would have to unlearn and relearn to then be able to represent our values. Now, all of this has to be a common secret in as much as Europeans who belong to those societies operate within common secrets is known, but we aren't aware of exactly what the agendas are and how they operate. Once we master that, we will master the justice aspect of powernomics. That isn't just informed by money, and it would never be successful just paying Europeans. There have to be those of a mindset who infiltrate every single area of the justice system, the civil service, because we'd also have to be extracting the intelligence to share amongst each other so that we can operate at an optimal level. And that goes all the way down to education, where we are making our youth aware of this, and then we're plucking out those bright stars to bring into those societies, to then enter into those industries. And I call them industries because they're all worth money. So if you're a probation officer, you get paid, you are part of a business. If you are a policeman, you get paid, you are part of a business. Magistrate, judge, whoever they are part of an industry. But because it happens to be working on behalf of the nation, we look at it as if it's an institution of the utmost forthright importance, and it's not. What we have to wrap our minds around is everything is a business. And when you look at it that way, that means that everything that they are doing is warfare. And if you think about us behind enemy lines, then everything is fair in war. That way we're no longer naive and we're prepared with every form of defense at our disposal.
All right, the Home Office is saying, oh, well, we'll give you compensation, we will right the wrong, we apologise, but that wasn't our interest. We looked at, okay, if you are apologising, then you are admitting culpability, and in law, you have to put the person you were wrong back in the position they would have been in had you not done that wrong. And what position were we in? Well, the position we were in, we were citizens. We had a right to education, we had a right to health, we had a right to not be disproportionately policed. We had a right to not have immigration law disproportionately enforced on us. And so we looked at all these things and says, right, well, from our point of view, these are the things that we're going to fight for, whatever the government says. And we thought, well, we can't, get a cannon and start fighting the government. Where can we fight them? And then we thought, well, we'll fight them in court. And this is where we decided to make an application to the courts for a judicial review. And it's a constitutional measure which it's used to keep a check on the government. So any decision that ministers make that impacts you, you can go to the courts and say, you think that the government is wrong in the decision that they have made. And we put the case together, got help from barristers who wanted to support our Windrush campaign, and we made an application for a judicial review. What we said was that the Windrush scheme and the compensation scheme were not fit for purpose because the government was saying that they were righting the wrongs. They were saying that we were British in all but legal status, but when we were doing the surgeries here, helping people to complete their applications to get their citizenship back, which the government took away, we found that many of them were still being refused for various reasons, say if they'd been in trouble with the police, and we know that a lot of people were disproportionately attacked by the police, and so a lot of those people were getting refused, and I'm thinking, well, how can that be right? Somebody who had come here before me, I'd seen grow up here, was now a grandfather, he was being refused. So we took all this to the court, and we said that the Windrush scheme was not fit for purpose. We argued the case, but the government said that many of the things that we were asking for, they could deal with in new legislation that was coming through. The judge heard the government's case, heard our case, and he ruled that because the government was using primary legislation, the only way we could get the sort of changes that we were looking for was if we got Parliament to do it. So we said, okay. The judge gave us his judgment in February, and then it gave us a judicial analysis as to how it had come to this, and then we're going to take that now to go to MPs to say, this is how this has come about, this is how we think you could fix the problem. And that is quite different from what the Home Office is saying needs to be done. They're still trying to work within current legislation, and we feel that's why you're not getting people coming forward, because people aren't daft. They know that if the situation wasn't good for them and you haven't changed the law, then what makes them think it's going to be any better? And so we find that a lot of people are staying away from it because they still think it's the same old, same old.
Of conduct. Then once you get to the third floor and get the police and court system straight, because you can now effectuate it, then you go to the fourth floor. The fourth floor means media. You cannot own television stations, radio stations, and daily newspapers if you don't have an economy. I hear black folk crying all the time. I have 2 radio stations. I used to have 4. You cannot have a media operation unless you have an economy. Who's going to buy your time, your ads? You got to have an economy to buy the time. And so you got to, right now we have 12,000 radio stations in the United States. We got about 12,000 cable systems, 5,000 daily newspapers, 5,000 TV stations. Black folk own 35 thousandths of 1%. You can't even communicate. You can't communicate, you can't organize. You can't get communication because you don't have an economy.
I think media in especially today's world is super important. It's a space that obviously we're involved in quite heavily, and I think the ability to actually control your own narrative is extremely important. I think amongst Black people, and having accurate representation of how we're depicted both in the media, whether it be social media, on programs, TV, film. I think this is one of the things that could really shift a lot of the mindset people probably have historically of Black people, the ways in which we move forward and the stories that we can tell of upliftment, of triumph, of a lot of people that's paved the way for us to do what we do today. I think this is the part that media can play in really bringing these stories to life. So for me, I think media is one of those avenues that, when exploited in the way that provides good and provides a way in which we can all kind of benefit from, we can learn from, we can educate others, I think it's definitely one of those mediums that is super powerful. I think we all should have some level of control of the stories that we choose to tell, and the way that we tell those stories is uniquely important, and it's for us to tell those stories about us. So I think the media is definitely something that we're trying to, in a lot of ways, take control of, and yeah, just make sure that our narrative and our stories are told the ways that we want them to be told.
So to me, it's so important to see us portrayed positively in the media. And when I came over here to the UK, the thing that stood out for me was the politeness of this country. It's actually, in my opinion, quite nauseating, because there are issues that exist and there are things that stand out so blatantly, and people veil them with this politeness of, for example, I don't see color. But I'll use Raheem Sterling for an example. Now, I'm a football mom, but I'm not into football as such. But the way that he has been portrayed, for example, when he purchased his mom a house, he was seen as wasting his money. But when a white footballer purchased his mom something, it's what a great investment, right?
I think the ownership component is probably one of the most important ones, because and we hear it all the time, without ownership, without having some level of control for your IP and all that comes within this media space, that does allow for, you know, other people to be able to dictate what actually makes the final cut. It actually dictates, you know, what's actually being told. So ownership's hugely important, not just for the sense of we have control over, you know, what we're putting out, but for a legacy. And I think legacy is a play that we all should be talking about, we all should be thinking about, and we all should be looking to build as best as we can, because as we move forward in this culture and we're keen to tell these stories, and we're really keen to, you know, paint a narrative for Black people in a real positive way, the generations coming after us, you know, being able to pass down all of what we've learned and all of what we are telling in terms of these stories, having ownership of that just enforces and really kind of allows us to be dictating who and what and where and when, in a lot of cases, how these stories will continue. So having ownership in a wide, I guess, variety, whether it's in front, behind the camera, at these organizations, these networks, super important. So I hope that, you know, that's something that we're all striving for and we can really utilize and, you know, just help the next generation coming up.
Using when Meghan Markle married Prince Harry, I watch a lot of American news. And so the excitement in the States was, you know, a Black woman marrying into the monarchy. But yet over here, They never said that, right? I remember the day they got married and they said she was unique. And I was saying to myself, what exactly does that mean? The way that the gentleman who did, I can't remember his name, who did the cartoon when they had the baby with the little monkey in the arms, and he's gonna say, oh, I didn't know that they had a boy. It's messages like that why I think it's so important for people like me in the UK who are committed to telling the stories of Black people in a positive manner. Being in Bermuda, I remember, and this is what I carry with me, and no matter where I am in the world, there was a drug addict, and she stole a sandwich. She ate the sandwich, it was considered theft. And all the other newscast outlets said, you know, drug addict steals sandwich. And I saw a bigger picture of a woman who was hungry because she had issues. And so I think that in journalism, especially in the UK, you have to have compassion and understand who you're writing about. Not that you change the narrative of the truth, but tell it accurately instead of putting this spin on it. And I see it a lot here. In the grand scheme of things, I'm just a little fish. But for me, everything that I do where it pertains to, you know, the Black UK community, I have a responsibility as a journalist to portray that as best as I can in an accurate light.
So when it comes to media, we know that propaganda absolutely works. 90% of the people are non-committal based on the education system that's indoctrinated them. And in a nutshell, what the education system stands for is agree, adopt, apply. Johnny's a good boy. Johnny gets a gold star. You are indoctrinated to become an approval junkie to get as many gold stars as you can so that you are competitive about having the most gold stars. That evolves from obey, fear, obey, consume, which backs up capitalism. So one hand washes the other, both hands wash the face. Capitalism informs education. Being aware of that and knowing that we are also propagated the minute we turn on that box, that device, that laptop, we are propagated at every avenue. And nothing showed us more than this colonial virus that just went by. Now, the vast majority of people would fight you down and start to adopt a propaganda term, science. In lieu of science, you just have to use the term science. And immediately we correlate that to the men in white jackets that were shown on TV as the authority, who are backed up by the politicians, who are backed up by the billionaire, who are backed up by the billionaire's wholly owned who. So how do you argue with people who've been propagated on that level? The answer is media. You must have a counter narrative to that all-encompassing international and global narrative. So if you think about Al Jazeera, why did Al Jazeera establish for the Arab world? Because it represents the truth or a bias leaning towards their social truths, which have to counter Western social truths. So when you create a war, which is to steal national assets in the Middle East, you create a narrative of protecting US freedoms. Well, there's no US freedoms being interrupted by nations 7,000 miles away who have no capacity to invade or affect you on the ground as a nation. So it's a bank robbery. If you go into a bank, I don't care whether it's with a banana, whether it's with a gun, whether it's with a note. If you emerge from that bank with money and no loan agreement, it was a bank robbery. And that's what happened in Iraq. Now, without Al Jazeera, we wouldn't have had all of the investigative journalism that exposed exactly what was happening. Now, RT does exactly the same. And that is why Britain and the US deplatformed RT as an outlet, as a media outlet. So let's ask ourselves a question. What is the global counterpart for Africans to RT and Al Jazeera? I'll wait, because it doesn't exist. So we are aware of the power of media and the importance of media. Otherwise, RT belonging to the Russian state, the third global military power on earth, would not have been deplatformed as a counter-narrative to the UK and US propaganda around the Ukraine. Now, the Ukraine is a sovereign nation. However, it's right in Russia's backyard. And if we cast our mind back to the 60s when, who was the president? Kennedy was president, and you had the standoff between Russia and the US. Why was Russia not allowed to put weapons in Cuba, which was also a sovereign nation? Because it was a security threat to the US in exactly the same way that the Ukraine is a security threat to Russia having weapons in their backyard. But you must be able to give volume to the voice of your agenda, and that is done through media. And the media is also a form of education for the proletariat and how they access information. Without a counter, we are criminalized and end up exactly where we are now. And just think about how Europeans have used media to isolate the African man globally to a wretched criminal, or their new agenda to effeminize us. So you don't see any other form, any other ethnicity of man wearing dresses to the Academy Awards other than African origin people, right? This is for a reason. It is to form a global picture in our minds of our ethnicity. And if we're not countering that narrative and countering it boldly, this will be the adopted narrative. This is why a wealthy African origin man can walk past a European woman who's broke and she'll clutch her bag. She's broke. All she has in that bag is £60 of debt on a credit card, and she's clutching her bag for a man who's wearing a £500 suit, based on the picture that she was given by the media that we are criminals and predators who want to attack her.
And once you get enough money, you put your medium up at the fourth floor. Then lastly, you tell the fifth floor, which is a school system, say, here's what we want. We don't want any more black basketball players and football players. Every black right now, a successful black, has got some kind of an illicit relationship with a ball. He's either running with a tennis ball, basketball, golf ball, football, sending on jokes, telling jokes, pretending he's having a ball. Just get away from that. And say from now on, you try to raise kids that can produce something. The producers will be the people survive. Right now, black folk are zero producers and 100% consumers. You're going to get totally wiped out in this country and wiped off the face of the earth under globalization if you don't learn how to produce vertically. You produce something at the bottom level, then you go up and you have other blacks coming over you. If like I'm producing fish, 1 million pounds of fish a year, I want blacks to come in and warehouse, wholesale, distributor, then retail. I want to see some black lobster restaurants in the country.
Education is the most important aspect of the 5 pillars, because it's literally how we're informed in our theta state. From 3 to 7, our minds are incredibly malleable. Our children are sponges, and whatever they receive in that first instance will impact them potentially for life, not being introduced to the concept of unlearn and relearn. And there is a specific virus that is uploaded to our operating systems in that state, which is the 2 black mindset. We are the beneficiaries of a 500-year European black experiment in which we're the subjects. And education has been a key component in that, to create a conducive mind that is trained to fear, obey, and conform. Then when we graduate the so-called education system and move into the capitalist system, it's very easy to take those malleable minds and then advance that fear, obey, conform programming to fear, obey, consume. And we do this with labels. The bigger the label, the smaller the self-esteem. Low self-esteem over-projects with purchasing power. So when you think about the wealth that we actually have access to as a people when we ethnically aggregate and where we spend it, the lower the self-esteem, the more we project from European and foreign-owned labels that we have wealth, that we don't. And this is why we can't harness it. That all comes down to the root of education.
In regards to education, I feel a lot of people from the Black community are starting to look at different alternatives now. So me personally, we homeschool our son, and we just go part-time to a Montessori house and we homeschool the rest of the days. And I feel the education system isn't designed to maximize Black children to fulfill their potential. So there's a book I was reading called The Medunetta, and it was explaining that it's well known throughout Western psychology that people from the West think from their left hemisphere, and people predominantly from the Eastern worlds think from their right hemisphere. And the whole school education system is designed for those to flourish who think from their left hemisphere. So I feel we need something that's specifically designed and catered towards us fulfilling our potential in the way that we learn best. So I feel moving forward, solutions would be having some type of curriculum or independent schools that's set up for Black children to thrive and prosper.
I've created a curriculum that has several options that are streamlined towards certain professions or certain careers, and working along, able to guide the young people who have chosen them, and also the teachers to ensure that particularly the teaching of vocational subjects meets industry standards, and also to what is required of that particular career or industry at that particular time, because trends change over the years. And so I felt that it was time to streamline so that you have young people who, once they've decided on a career, they would be mentored by that mentor in that particular field, so that they're pretty sure that that's just what they want to do. And, you know, be young, that they have a chance if they've decided, for example, that they want to be a barrister, and then they've shadowed a barrister and looked at what is required of the career, that is not what quite they wanted. They could change to something else. And we would also find a mentor in that particular field, so that you don't have young people who will go all the way through university and then come out and then realize that this is not what they want to do. And so the curriculum that was in response to that, to ensure that those young people knew exactly where they were going. And also a year before they were ready to move into work, the mentors would begin to facilitate the first work placement, because even if they didn't have it within their own establishments, they always know others in the field. Now, where mine differs from is that mine was more global. So that if there was an opportunity, let's say with an accounting firm or a law firm in Jamaica or in Trinidad or in some part of Africa or any part of the UK, that is where the young person goes upon graduating, because some children will go to work straight after school, because now schools are going until 18. Some will go after college, some will go after university. It's pretty much an individual thing. And the mentors who are assigned to those children are there for the long haul, right through until they get into first employment. So for me, it was a short-proof way of seeing, you know, a young person through their education right into first employment, and then they take it from there. And it is hope that those who have been mentored into first employment, some of them will give back and mentor the next set coming up. And so it goes, so that there's always a bank of mentors.
Okay, so what's wrong with the education system is that it is not diverse enough. We're lacking in representation for our children, and there's no truer saying that if you want to be something, you have to be able to see it. A lot of our children don't feel validated in school. They don't feel free enough to be able to express opinions and ideas about their own culture, because they're not able to bring that culture into the classroom and learn from it in a positive way. A simple thing like discussing food, you know, you'll get the hands that go up that say, well, I had spaghetti bolognese, I had cheese on toast. And there's that one child who wants to say, well, I had ackee saltfish, green banana and dumplings. And they don't want to say it because they're looking around the room and thinking, there's nobody here. There's no one here that will understand or even know what I'm talking about. So whether it's a child, whether it's a teacher, whether it's another adult that's present in the classroom, there's definitely a lack of representation in our schools today.
When it comes to education, without hesitation, no ethnicity would hand over their children to a wholly run, governed and managed African and African Caribbean school. No ethnicity, because they're aware of the repercussions of handing over your children to an ethnicity other than them to educate them. So when you look at Islamic schools and then Islamic supplementary schools, they understand that they're still going to govern the minds of their children. And when I talk about governance, we always think about politics, but if you think about governance of your house, your first house is your mind. And the most important house to govern is your mind. What we don't do is protect the windows and doors of our minds, which is why we have so many entry points based on the malware that is delivered through the education system to indoctrinate us and our children.
The curriculum, again, it doesn't allow the children to be their true authentic self in terms of their culture and bringing that into the classroom. It doesn't provide that diversity that children need to see positive people, not just in physically positive people, but in the resources that are being used. It's not there. They can't see anything or anyone that looks like them that they can relate to. So I do think that there needs to be more of, the curriculum needs to be more diverse. Yeah, and that's what's lacking.
I think, to be quite frank, you know, and as I tell the children that I work with and I have over the years, you can be whoever you want to be. You know, we start every day with an affirmation, and we also, you know, I give them space to do a gratitude list and opening up their minds to the endless possibilities that they can have. Whoever you want to be, whatever you want to be, it is absolutely achievable. Don't, you know, dream big, you know, and that is got to be the way forward. You know, and don't, sometimes you've got to put the blinkers on, and because you will have naysayers even within your own family who are saying, oh, you can't do that, that's too, you know, nobody's ever achieved that, it's not going to happen. You will have people who will doubt, but if you decide that is what you want to do, sometimes you've got to put the blinkers on and just go for it. And you know, what I also stress is the prerequisite to getting what you want is to want it. After that, if you keep focused on this is what you want, you will find that avenues will open up to facilitate that happening. I teach that every day.
And you build, and I had about 2 more minutes I got. Now, and you build these vertical orders based on your competitive advantages. Build your businesses where you have a competitive advantage. What are your competitive advantages, black folk? Always build your business where you dominate in population or you dominate in spending patterns. I built the seafood factories. Why? Because blacks eat 3 to 4 times more seafood than whites, and you spend $9 for every $1 whites spend. You should be controlling the seafood industry. Do the same thing with leather. You do the same thing with your hair. Right now, blacks are the only people got a certain quality of hair, and yet the Koreans are controlling black hair care in America. And you watch you build these businesses like the difference between Detroit and Chinatown. You got it in Chinatown in New York. In Chinatown, New York, they got about a little less than 300,000 Chinese there. And in Detroit, you had almost 1 million blacks. I looked at the two and compared them. In Chinatown, they had 35 banks, 35 Asian banks. Detroit, they got 2 black banks, and that's owned by the same one. How is it that almost a million people don't have 2 banks and 300,000 don't have 35 banks? I looked at the number of restaurants. The Asians had almost 400-something restaurants in New York. Black folk in Detroit had 3. I looked at and I said, how do these Asians producing so well and have so much, and Asians have the highest median family income in America. Here's what they do in conclusion. They build around their advantage. What is it that Asians eat the most of? They eat noodles. I went and found something like about 100 and some noodle factories in New York where they produce their own noodles. Now, once they produce the noodles, what do you put on the noodles? They put a sauce on the noodles. I found about another 60 or 70 companies that produce the sauce to go on the noodles. And I said, what else they producing? Then when I found that they had, I don't know how many, 35 or 40 companies that made the little fortune cookies. They take care of their own people. That's why you'll never see Asians, Arabs, Hispanic, or American Indians out marching for integration or for social civil rights. They don't do it. They build businesses. I love you all. Take care.
I think we need to be enthusiastic once again. I feel that the strength is in coming together as community. When I look back at my parents' experience, and I wonder that with the types of racism that they experienced, and that was well before the Race Relations Act came into being, you know, because that's 1970s. That's 1975, 76, Race Relations Act, Race Relations Amendment Act. That at the you know, so they came 20 years before those times, and it is because of their experience not getting employment, not being able to be housed, not getting the same treatment that was the force behind, and their reaction to that, people literally being hunted down in the street and killed in the street, that brought about the Race Relations Act. So let's, you know, be truthful about that. You know, it's a hard fought battle. People didn't just knock on our doors and say, what can we do for you? We had to fight to get that legislation. And the legislation still wasn't enough. We know it wasn't enough, but it was a step toward having a challenge towards lockouts in workplaces, because at those times people could simply just say, we're not employing you because you're black, like move. You know, there is no job for you. And be very clear about that. They could openly discriminate without any form of recompense or redress from law. So I asked myself, what was different in their times? How is it they were the forefathers of setting up educational groups and Sunday clubs and Saturday clubs where we would do learning and you know, that my elder brothers and sisters certainly were recipients of. I'm very much the tail end of that. But how didn't they get so overwhelmed with it all? And I think that things have become, over time, so much more entrenched into systems, that it's the systems almost that have continued with the levels of racism that we feel and experience. When I say that we feel, I mean that we experience. So how we might be treated in the criminal justice system, how we might receive over-aggressive policing. Those things are systems issues. They are not about some individual people, and I will always challenge that. So politically, we need to come back with that same level of force, that belief that together we have the solutions to this, and convince people that the solutions are in empowering us to be our own leaders, to be our own decision makers, and to trust us with that, to be the leaders of that journey, to trust us with that responsibility, essentially. And that is the difference of what happened in the 50s, 60s, 70s is that because they didn't know us, people didn't have us amongst them, and we were very separate in the way that we lived our lives. We went to separate churches. We stayed together on our own in the workplace. We kept separate places in the community, and the mixing really wasn't happening. People didn't know us, and they left us to that, and actually there was a strength in that. It's from there that partner came, that we learned to find our own financial sources, and it was going to be found from people helping each other, supporting one another to build forward. And that's how we bought houses. We paid for our houses. We bought the relations over, and we supported them, we sponsored them, and that's how we did it. And that's the sort of enthusiasm that we really need from ourselves to be the solution finders to this particular problem right now.
I think we have to try and move forward together. And what I liked about the Pipeline project is the number of people who took part in it, the number of people who got on what's called the panel. So you can't be selected as a Labour councillor unless you've gone through this pre-vetting exercise. And that's the way they keep a lot of people out. So I'm actually really proud of what we did, because we got a lot of people on the panel who hadn't been there before, which means they're eligible to become Labour candidates. For me personally, I don't see stepping down as a councillor as a bad thing. I think I did as much as I could, given the forces that were ranged against me. And I think because I was pushing really hard, the harder you push to get stuff done, the harder they come back at you. And I really made a decision that I could do more outside elected office than inside. But I don't think, it's like a battle. Just because one soldier has fallen, it doesn't mean the others should think, oh, well, we're not going to enter the battle. And I do actually think it is, I know I've used a military analogy, but I do actually think that's what's going on. It's a fight for resources, and our community gets very little. For instance, Moss Side has had its boundaries changed. Alexandra Park used to be part of Moss Side, boundary change, lost it. Whitworth Park used to be part of Moss Side, boundary change, lost it. And if you think that the boundary changes are to equalise populations, but nobody lives in the parks, so why move the parks? And I just think more people will learn about politics. It is hard. Getting something you want and deserve is never going to be easy. People don't voluntarily give up power. I think where I've been, others will come forward.
Bringing back the duality, bringing back the yin and the yang, the feminine and the masculine principle, bringing back this notion of being a master teacher. So this European notion of, oh, jack of all trades, master of none, that you can be a master of so many trades, case in point. But what I'm saying is not limiting these young people. If they want to do A, B, C, if they want to be a footballer and a rapper, let them do it. Do you know what I'm saying? And get them to master their trade. So I guess part of the solution is empowering and encouraging and enabling young black people to be able to be everything, not just one thing, not to stay in your lane and be really good at it and then just be this robot for the rest of your life working in a job. Go out and get your career, go out and travel, go out and get your training, your learning, any opportunity you can, jump on it, because under the age of 25 in this country, a lot of it is free. So get your things, do you know what I'm saying? Definitely get the people them to run you the check that is owed to you because of your parents and your grandparents building and paying into this system. And a lot of black young people don't recognise the impact that their parents and their grandparents have made on this country in terms of building it. Not only the infrastructure, but politically, culturally. And we also have to remember that every time black people win, everybody else does. All the other non-black people win. So I think that's part of the reason why we've got this continual struggle, because we are the representation of the global majority and the rest of the world. So we as black people, once we win, then everybody else does, if that makes sense.
I was a seed who came up through concrete and emerged into a tree. That was highly intentional process after making 1,000,001 mistakes. So when I see our young men specifically who find the pavement attractive, they don't understand where they actually think that they're predators or machines. They don't understand just how naive they are, that they bought into the programming from the education system. that is an indoctrination that has given them a limited set of beliefs through a very narrow filter that, first of all, we're ethnic minorities. Now, as a 1.5 billion global population, we could never be ethnic minorities. We're the global majority. And even if they were referring to the UK, the term ethnic minorities isn't numeric, it's economic. It's created to isolate you. Whenever you get big ideas, they just throw that programming on there because it's a form of malware. If you think about our minds as operating systems and a CPU, all you have to do is write adverse lines of code all the way through creating a program. Those programs actually inform our operating systems. So by the time you get to 47 like me, that malware affects every single decision that you make. So one of those, when I talk about ethnic aggregation, is that's too black. Now this is part of a 500-year European black experiment that we're the subjects of, but have no contribution to the project. So all of that program that affects our operating systems is created by Europeans. Now, the demonstration that I put forward is that it's easy for us to bust that programming and apply the antivirus, but you've got to go through a process of unlearning and relearning. And that's why I make my message in public, because I'm the living embodiment of it, who had every single one of those malware programming components and has erased them from my system. So Europeans don't take up any mental real estate in my cerebellum. And the more I can convey that to us, especially young men who could go on a very short journey, just like I did after I read Malcolm X at 17, and come out the other side, understanding that we are our natural delivery partners, that we are the global majority, that we are physically strongest, that we are the most courageous. However, understanding that we are also highly emotional based on our spiritual compass. So our emotions are our biggest entry point, and those are the entry points used that we have to guard that other people will utilize. And they utilize it for outrage marketing. All you'd have to do is say N-word on a t-shirt. We're going to react and give you 23 million's worth of advertising for free over the course of a weekend, possibly a week, and quite possibly a month. So I have come to understand our weaknesses as a human algorithm and our strengths. In highlighting our weaknesses, it's about us protecting those entry points and then utilizing our strengths and combining them so that we can ethnically aggregate to be equally as successful as any other ethnicity in our socio-economic endeavors.
Again, it's about knowing what you want to do. If you are thinking of going down the road of setting up your own business, you have to say to yourself, is that degree necessary? Is there a short course I could do to be able to set my own business up and do my own thing? If you're wanting to go into an establishment that's already there, then yeah, I would say go and do your degree. No one can take that degree away from you once you've got it, it's yours. But then maybe enhance it with your own ideas, other courses, and use it as an advantage, use it as a tool. That's what that's there for, if it's going to help you. But it just depends on which way you want to go.
In order to execute on any idea, there's 3 components that you need to have in place. And those are, you need the resources and capital. You need a network, as I like to say, your network is your net worth. And you also need the knowledge and skill set. And I feel if you have those 3 components, then you can achieve anything you set your mind to.
Well, I think even a step back is that we need to support each other, and we need to understand that or learn that certain outlets exist. What's their purpose? We must uplift. I think sometimes we get into this white is better, or our people cannot do it as well. And we need to move away from that mindset, because in order for people to buy in, they have to believe. If they don't believe, they're not going to buy in. And so we need to be able to say, you know what, I know that this organization, they do everything that they can to change the narrative, to uplift us as a people. Let's support them and let's tell others about them so that they can join as a community in order to help elevate. Because what people, I don't think, understand is if we don't support, then whatever it is that's existing will die. And I find it interesting that sometimes we don't support, and then when it dies, we say, oh, but that was such a good thing. Well, why didn't we support it? So I think we need to value each other as a community, as a diaspora more. And once we do that, then I think that, the results would just be exponential.
As I said, there's going to be a lot going on from this place here, the Windrush Centre, which is the flagship of our community now. It didn't have a chance to express itself in its way, but now that it's up and running, we're going to get things back in the way they're supposed to be. And there's a lot going on for the youngsters. We have a lot of programs. We're still writing and getting our ideas together before I'm going to release them, but I will release them in due course. As I said, we look forward to working hand in hand with our community assets and the Windrush Centre and every other establishment that serves our community, and I mean serves our community. Some of our own leaders have let us down. I'm not going to go into that, but everybody knows what time it is concerning that. As I said, there'll be no more false leaders leading the people astray, and the community will get its assets, and the assets will be available to them in due course. But as I said, there's a lot going on, and we're going to empower the next generation. We're going to educate them. We're going to show them how to live. How we lived in the community before things got terrible. It was a beautiful way. We had nothing, but we had love and we had unity. Love and unity was the most important thing that we had. Now we're just going to put some finances and economy on top of that, and we hope to see the future bright for the kids of this community. Stay tuned.
You've got to make it happen. All of the young leaders I spoke to said their children are saying, why should we have the Commonwealth Games?
Wow.
I'm saying when they see the Commonwealth Youth Games in Trinidad, that's going to hopefully inspire them. Yeah. And then we'll say, when are we going to host the Commonwealth Games in the Caribbean? When are we going to host the Olympic Games in the Caribbean?
Yeah.
When are we going to host the Commonwealth Games in Africa? When are we going to host the Olympic Games in Africa?
Mm-hmm.
That's when we've seen our talent. When you see the young talent that was on the track in Birmingham, and in all the other sports. I gave a medal out to a super lightweight female judo gold medalist, the first gold medalist South Africa will have realized.
Wow.
Now she goes back to those townships where women are consistently bullied, abused, and raped. So when I awarded her that gold medal, having spent 30 years in post-apartheid South Africa, I know what that means. That was something more than gold. So when she shed a tear, I shed a tear, because Mandela's words are effervescent in our vision and mission. Vision without action is but a dream. Action without vision is merely passing time. Vision with action can change the world. Take the world, change the world. You have the means to be able to communicate it, articulate it, and present it in a way that can be understood.
I think the important thing about future generations, they've got to determine their own lives. That's the first thing. I don't think people like me should be telling the future generation what they should do. However, they can learn, and I think that's the important thing. Number one, Marcus Garvey said, a people without a knowledge of their origin, history, and culture is like a tree without roots. Yeah. So if the future generations, the descendants, don't know their history, their culture, their origin, they're gonna end up being like a tree without roots. And sooner or later, our culture, our history, our origins will disappear.
Windrush. I hear the wind rush over the desiccated memories of my forefathers and foremothers. I hear the air sigh and lament the forgotten legacies of a people whose strength is as hardened as the streets they first walked upon on that auspicious date where they landed in June 1948. Windrush. I hear the wind rush. After 400 years of pain and hurt, still they came triumphantly with a thirst for work and an appetite for progress, with a hearty persistence and a quiet, humble resistance, stood the test of time through traditions and teachings taken from the real mother country, Africa. Windrush, I hear the wind rush, and over 70 years ago the NHS was birthed, born out of toil and labour of women and men who look like me. So yeah, I'm getting my healthcare for free. No, but seriously, we owe such a debt to that generation. So pay reverence and pour give libation through challenging and establishing structures that speak truth to power. The time is now. The time is ours. Windrush. I hear the wind rush, and it says hush. And be still, it whispers promises of tomorrow whilst it blows nostalgia of our past. It says better times are coming and this oppression cannot last. Today we make history and start to dismantle the lie. They may seek to tread us in the dirt, but still, like dust, we rise.